This is the David Doel Show on In-Depth Radio, News Talk 1010.
Hello and welcome to the David Doel Show, your rational look at news, politics, and culture, right here on In-Depth Radio, News Talk 1010. I, of course, am your host, David Doel, and on today's show, Megyn Kelly's history of racist remarks and why was she really fired from NBC? Also, being critical of conservatives does not make you a liberal. I voice my concerns with Justin Trudeau and the Liberals right now. And later on in the show, is Doug Ford a real populist? Or is he a fake populist? All that and more coming up on the David Doel Show. But before we get into it, this is my first show. So I actually come from the world of YouTube, where I host and produce The Rational National. I have over 60,000 subscribers and over 8 million views. I'm also a former Green Party of Canada candidate, and I have voted for every major party in my short time on this earth. So that gives you sort of an idea of my evolution. I began as really a conservative voter back when I didn't really follow politics too closely. So the first time I ever voted was for Stephen Harper, and then I guess evolved to the Liberal Party. And then I moved on to the NDP, and then eventually voted for myself as a Green Party candidate. But I feel it's my show here is more about policy over party. I feel like a lot of the political discussion right now around politics is so focused on us versus them, or what team you're on, as opposed to actual policy. So that is something you're going to see a pattern of when I discuss these topics. But another aspect I really want to focus on this show is open-mindedness. So open-mindedness and empathy. I think this is what's really missing right now. Not even in just politics, but in our culture. We get so divided, we get so stuck on our different teams that we forget to really look through the lens of someone else and maybe how they're experiencing something. So you're also going to notice that approach to the various topics that I touch on. So there is a lot to get to in this show, but first, it's been a devastating week of events in the U.S. There has been 3 separate right-wing terror incidents. There, of course, yesterday was the Pittsburgh synagogue shooting, where Robert Bowers shouted anti-Semitic slurs before opening fire, killing 11 people and wounding 6 others. There's also, of course, the homemade bombs that were sent to critics of Donald Trump, including Maxine Waters, the Clintons, Obama, CNN, even Robert De Niro, and many others. And authorities arrested 56-year-old Cesar Sayak of Florida, who coincidentally had a van covered in Trump propaganda. So if you saw those images, there was he had images of Trump and Pence, and also images of Hillary Clinton, Van Jones of CNN, Barack Obama, even Green Party candidate Jill Stein, and had targets on each of them. Now, there was one more incident I want to mention that wasn't really touched on too much this week, and that was a hate crime in Kentucky, where Gregory Bush, a white man with a history of violence, first tried to get inside a predominantly black church. When he was not able to get in, he went to a nearby grocery store and fatally shot 2 African Americans. A white witness that came across the gunman claimed that the gunman said to him, "I won't shoot you. Whites don't shoot whites," end quote. Now, there was, back in the 70s, left-wing terrorism was on the rise, and that was really the focus, including a lot of environmentalists and terrorism stemming from environmentalists. But we now have to face the reality, regardless of what side of the aisle you're on, regardless of who you vote for, right-wing terrorism is on the rise. It's an issue that we need to face, and we can't play this both sides game. We have to understand that right now, the society that we are living in, it is right-wing terrorism. So, according to the Investigative Fund, over the past 10 years in America, there have been more right-wing domestic terror incidents than there has any other type of terrorism. And according to the Global Terrorism Database, In 2017, out of the 65 terror incidents in the U.S., 37 of them were tied to racist, anti-Muslim, homophobic, anti-Semitic, fascist, or xenophobic motivations. Now, Trump is an easy target here. His comments about the media and about his political enemies are clear. We see it all over television. So his influence here can't be overstated, especially in the case of the homemade bombs being sent to his political enemies. But we also have to understand that right-wing media, especially, places like Fox News, have played a massive part in this. So back in the 80s, the fairness doctrine was removed under Reagan. And that allowed Fox News to flourish and essentially put out propaganda. Now, look, I have plenty of criticisms about CNN and MSNBC and New York Times, Washington Post, but they do not go out of their way to misinform people. Fox News and others like Alex Jones, which thankfully has sort of been sidelined at this point, go out of their way to misinform people. Now, this is not all of Fox News. There are aspects of that network that do actually, report on facts. But for the most part, shows like Laura Ingram's show, Tucker Carlson, these hosts flirt with fascism, white nationalism. Tucker Carlson alone, he had an episode where he discussed how the changing demographics of America are scary. What else is there to take from that other than Tucker Carlson wants white nationalism. Tucker Carlson doesn't want diversity, even though America, much like Canada, is built on diversity. We are built on multiculturalism. So to deny that and to act like, oh, now it's scary, but back before when the Italians were scary, or back before when the Irish were scary, no, that's different because now it's brown people. And that, for some reason, makes it okay to be racist against them. The right-wing media has led to Donald Trump. Donald Trump is not the problem here. He is a symptom of the problem. And an extension of that is a University of Alabama study shows that terror attacks by Muslims receive 357% more press attention than any other type of terrorism. Now, that is not just a problem in right-wing media. This is all media. The CNNs, the MSNBCs, the New York Times, they focus more on Muslim terrorism than they do on right-wing terrorism. Even though, as I said, right-wing terrorism is the majority of terrorism right now. So if you are to be scared of anybody, the fact is you should be scared of white men. Now, I say this as a white man, but you have to face the facts. You have to look at what the reality is. So when we are talking about issues of terrorism, and look, I feel like terrorism in general is already too much of a focus right now in media. But if we are to focus on terrorism, it should be on right-wing terrorism. We have to look at this as objectivity over neutrality. Too often, the news is too focused on what does this side say, what does this side say, I don't know what the answer is. They have to focus on objectivity. What do the facts tell us? So just to wind down here, you have to be critical of politicians and media, both right-wing or left-wing, or what I would call establishment media in terms of MSNBC and CNN. But at the same time, we also have to reach out to friends and family that may have isolated themselves from society. Coming up next, what responsibility does a host have to their audience? We'll talk about Megyn Kelly's history of racist remarks and why was she really fired from NBC. You're listening to David Doel on News Talk 1010.
The David Doel Show continues on News Talk 1010.
Welcome back to the David Doel Show, your rational look at news, politics, and culture, right here on In-Depth Radio, News Talk 1010. So, what responsibility does a host have to their audience? This is what Megyn Kelly said this week.
It's racist because truly you do get in trouble if you are a white person who puts on blackface on Halloween or a black person who puts on whiteface for Halloween. Like back when I was a kid, that was okay as long as you were dressing up as like a character. There was a controversy on The Real Housewives of New York with Luann as she dresses Diana Ross and she made her skin look darker than it really is, and people said that that was racist. And I don't know, I thought, like, who doesn't love Diana Ross? She wants to look like Diana Ross for one day. I don't know how like that got racist on Halloween.
Now, this was a quasi-defense of blackface, but I will defend Megyn Kelly on these comments a little bit. So in a vacuum, if anybody else had said these comments and maybe they were not being paid $23 million a year and they had an excuse to not be educated on this topic, I could see, okay, give them a second chance. They said a really dumb thing. They asked a dumb question. My issue with Megyn Kelly in this situation is that she didn't have somebody on the panel to refute her. That whole panel was white. And there was no one there to properly educate her on why blackface is so terrible. So she did, of course, the next day apologize, and she did have on Roland Martin, who educated her on the topic. But the question here is, I mean, really, what responsibility does a host have to their audience? Should she have been educated on this topic before talking about it? Now, I would say yes, especially if you're being paid $23 million a year. So let me just give you a quick history here of blackface and why this is an issue. So there were, of course, the minstrel shows in the 1800s, which characterized blacks as lazy, ignorant, and cowardly. There was the character Jim Crow, which that name may sound familiar to you, as the racial segregation laws became known as Jim Crow laws. So back then, black performers were also forced to wear blackface makeup. And the reason? It was to hide their humanity. Now, when you understand that, you understand what sort of deep wound blackface has, especially in America. You have to realize that this isn't just PC culture, as even Megyn Kelly herself said in her apology, which I thought was ridiculous. This is not PC culture. This is historical context. This is understanding the issue and understanding why it's a sensitive issue. Now, why was she really fired? Because Megyn Kelly her show was not canceled over this comment about blackface. When NBC hired her, she already had a history of making racist comments. So let me go through some of those. There was a caption on her show when she was on Fox News. A caption on her show referred to Michelle Obama as, quote, Obama's baby mama, end quote. She also claimed that Jesus was white, which is just, I mean, absurd on the face of it. She also said that Santa is white. He just is, kids. Even though Santa is a character rooted in Saint Nick from Turkey. And look, I understand people are going to say, oh, but the Santa that we know is white. Yeah, but think about it. Why is the Santa that we know is white? Why is he white? Because white people controlled everything. So they created this character that represented them. So when we have a society that diversifies and changes, it's perfectly okay to also have other versions of Santa. Santa does not have to be white. We have to understand that our perspective is not necessarily the perspective of other people. We can evolve past that perspective when we understand that. And it doesn't hurt you to have a Santa that isn't white. It shouldn't affect you. If it does, then you're the snowflake. So again, why was she really fired? This has nothing to do with her racist remarks, as I read to you. Actually, there's more. So she also dismissed a DOJ report when she was on Fox News that found racist emails in the Ferguson, Missouri Police Department. She argued that there are very few companies in America where you won't find racist emails. I mean, NBC knew who they were hiring. So her show was canceled because she averaged 2.4 million viewers, which, you know, if I had 2.4 million listeners, that'd be amazing. But we're talking about the Today Show. We're talking about NBC. So her show was a drop of nearly 400,000 viewers from the same hour's average before her arrival. And she trailed her rival morning program, Live with Ryan and Kelly, by about 700,000 viewers. So again, this did not have to do with her racist comments. NBC knew exactly who they were hiring. So I ask you again, what responsibility does a host have to their audience? I'm not being paid $23 million a year, but I feel a responsibility to my audience to tell you reality, to tell you the facts, to educate myself. I spend hours and hours researching, not just for this show, but also on YouTube. I want my audience to come away more educated than they were when they came into my videos or this show. So for me, it's about educating people. And if you are someone in Megyn Kelly's position, if it is your job to discuss culture, sometimes discuss news, and I know Megyn Kelly's show was not necessarily about news as it once was, but she discussed cultural topics. She discussed news. She needs to be educated on these topics. You have to educate yourself before you put yourself out there. There is a responsibility that we all have. If you are a public figure, and I think there's even an argument to be made if you aren't just covering news, but maybe you're just a celebrity, and you are asked these questions around different news items when you're on a talk show, for example. If you are a public figure, if you have a following, it is your responsibility to educate yourself on the issues. And obviously, you're not going to be as educated on some issues as other people are. And if that's the case, you know what? Don't make comments. Megyn Kelly did not have to bring up blackface if she didn't know what the hell the history of it was. But she herself decided to bring it up. So if you don't know something, it's okay to say so. There are many topics I know nothing about. And you know what? I'm not going to be discussing them. But if I'm going to discuss something, I'm going to educate myself first, knowing that there are people watching me, that there are people listening to what I'm saying, and that they may be telling other people what I just told them. So yes, we all have a responsibility to our audience, regardless of how much you're paid. So the lesson here is to educate yourself. And look, if you're wondering why some issues are touchy, why some people are bothered by certain topics, don't just assume that they're sensitive snowflakes. Maybe it's you that needs to be educated. Take the initiative and educate yourself on why certain topics may be off limits. Coming up next, don't assume my critiques of conservatives mean that I'm a liberal. I discuss my current beef with Justin Trudeau and the Liberal Party. You're listening to David Doel on News Talk 1010.
You're listening to The David Doel Show. News Talk 1010.
Welcome back to The David Doel Show, your rational look at news, politics, and culture, right here on In-Depth Radio, News Talk 1010. Assumptions. People make assumptions all the time, especially in politics. They assume that if you are critical of conservatives, then you must be a diehard liberal. But if we get away from looking at politics as a team sport and look at it issue by issue, there are issues that a lot of us, I think, can agree on and can disagree on. So when it comes to Justin Trudeau and the Liberal Party, look, I clearly voted for myself. I voted for the Green Party in 2015. I did not vote Liberal. But at the time, especially when it was getting down to the wire, I mean, I definitely wanted Trudeau to defeat Stephen Harper and the Conservatives. But that doesn't mean I can't now be critical of Trudeau, especially, I mean, let's get into it here. So first, I guess the good things. So he's very focused on gender equality, which I think is definitely important. Cannabis legalization, I think, is a much needed move, and I'm glad that Canada is actually a leader. This may be the only issue that we are now leading on is cannabis legalization. I mean, there's also Uruguay that legalized it first, but in terms of major countries, major nations, Canada is really the first to do so. I should say that it feels so weird to talk about cannabis now that we could just openly talk about this, but my first legal cannabis arrived in the mail last week, and it was, I gotta tell you, it was a weird experience. Having the box arrive, and actually the guy, the postal Canada Post guy, didn't ask for my ID, which I think they're supposed to, but I guess I look old enough. And so I opened the box, and it's, yep, that's cannabis. There's a Canadian label on that. That's it's definitely that's weed. It's just the whole thing is weird, but I'm glad it's happening. I mean, it took long enough, and now for a future episode of the show, I hope to discuss where I want this to go, because I think we should now be looking at the medicinal use of psychedelics and their benefits, as we now see through many studies with psilocybin mushrooms and ayahuasca and MDMA. Many psychedelics have had profound effects for people with PTSD, anxiety, depression. But I digress. Let's get back to... look, Justin Trudeau has essentially been trying to fix a lot of what the Conservatives broke. So a couple examples: he reinstated the long-form census, and he unmuzzled government scientists. Great, good, that's awesome. But come on now, he's playing footsie with oil giants. A $4.5 billion Trans Mountain pipeline. I mean, Canada was a leader in the 80s on environmental policy, believe it or not. And now we have the Liberal Party purchasing a $4.5 billion pipeline, which on the same day that sale went through, on the same day Kinder Morgan approved that, the shareholders approved that, the Federal Court of Appeals quashed the government approvals of the expansion of that pipeline because Canada did not properly consult First Nations groups. And they also didn't consider the increase in tanker traffic off the coast of BC. Now, I don't view myself as all that smart, to be quite honest. But if I have a talent, my talent is my ability to recognize who is smart. My ability to recognize who is telling me the truth, who is being objective. And because of that, I saw this coming. So big shout out here to, I mean, this was one of several, but Ethan Cox of Ricochet in April said that Kinder Morgan was playing the Trudeau government. He saw this coming because that is an objective reporter. These are the people that when we recognize them, we have to listen to them. When there is a track record of a journalist predicting something like this, being correct on this issue, the whole time Kinder Morgan was playing the Liberal government. They knew that they would have problems with this pipeline. They were already having issues with the protests, dealing with First Nations. So they thought, you know what? Yeah, we can give this pipeline to the Canadian government for $4.5 billion and approve that sale right at the same time that the Federal Court of Appeals quashed the approvals. So that's one issue I have with the Trudeau government is environmental policy, their approach here. Also, another move. or another issue I have with the Trudeau government. Saudi Arabia. So first, I mean, to be fair here, there was a good move they made in the summer where they called for the release of a jailed women's rights activist, Samar Badawi. That was a good move. But, I mean, we are selling armored trucks to the Saudis. They're in a war right now with Yemen. They are bombing children. Right now in Yemen, there is mass starvation. 2 million malnourished children in Yemen. 400,000 of those children are considered critically ill. In April, a Saudi airstrike hit a wedding party, killing 33 people, including the bride. In August, an American-supplied bomb dropped on a school bus, killing 51 people, including 40 boys aged 6 to 11. Now, Germany has frozen their arm deals with the Saudis, and that's in relation to the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. But even before that murder, now, clearly that was, I mean, unspeakable. To kill a dissident in the consulate in Istanbul, yes, that is a reason to end the arms deals. But another reason is the fact that the Saudis are murdering people in Yemen. Now, NDP MP Charlie Angus actually has a 4-part plan to this. His plan is 1, cancel the arm deal, so don't sell the Saudis these armored trucks. 2, invoke the Magnitsky sanctions, which allows the government to freeze the Canadian assets of foreign actors who violate human rights. 3, people are worried about jobs. Oh, but if you cancel this arms deal, those jobs are going to go away. Okay, if you're that worried about the jobs, repurpose the plant in London to build military vehicles for our troops who need the upgrades. This is Charlie Angus's plan, NDP MP. This, I think, is a great plan. And number 4, step 2 his plan, this is his wording here. Tell the Crown Prince he can stuff his objections. I think that's fair. So we have the Saudi Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, who ordered this murder on Jamal Khashoggi, the journalist, who has been critical of Saudi Arabia and their human rights abuses. We have this Saudi-led war in Yemen, again, because of the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman. Why exactly are we friends with the Saudis? I mean, look, I understand people have issues with, but China, we also do deals with China and this and that. Yeah, but we can start with the big items, like not selling armored trucks to a country that is murdering people, murdering children in Yemen. That is clearly has human rights abuses. Why are we dealing with this? We are better than this as a country, as a nation. So you can't change the actions of a nation that is violating human rights if you act like they are a close ally of yours. Now, again, they did do some good in terms of asking to get Samar Badawi out of jail. That was a good move, and they took heat for that, but that was good. But if you let this, allowing this arms sale, it shows you that when money's on the line, then that wins above all else. It doesn't matter. Oh yeah, but we're going to lose. It's going to cost billions of dollars. So you're telling us that billions of dollars is more important than the lives of people in Yemen, more important than human rights abuses. So there is a price on life for you. Look, as I said, be critical of every party. Don't treat politics as a team sport. Look at each issue objectively and from a variety of perspectives, and maybe you'll see issues in a new light. Coming up next, populism. You've heard the word, but is Doug Ford a populist or a fake populist? You're listening to David Doel on News Talk 1010.
It's the David Doel Show. In-depth radio, News Talk 1010.
Welcome back to the David Doel Show, your rational look at news, politics, and culture, right here on In-Depth Radio, News Talk 1010. Now, before I get into it, into populism, I want to respond to a text message I saw sent. Someone asked if I have ever used the drugs that I discussed that we should potentially legalize for medicinal use, the psychedelics. In fact, yes, I have. I went to Peru for ayahuasca, and I will hopefully one day in a future show get into that because I feel that psychedelics are extremely beneficial. And now look, they're not for everyone, and I do think they should be used medicinally, but they are beneficial for PTSD, anxiety, depression, and it's not just me saying this. There's a Johns Hopkins study looking into psilocybin mushrooms and their benefits with anxiety, depression, and PTSD. So, I mean, this is not just anecdotal. There's proof behind it. But populism, you've heard the word. But do you know what it actually means? So populism over the past couple of years has been tied to right-wing extremism, been tied to Donald Trump and Doug Ford. Now, I don't think Doug Ford is quite the same level as Donald Trump, but there is that same sort of rhetoric of I'm for the people and my enemies aren't. When, I mean, all the evidence shows otherwise. So first, we have to understand what populism is. Populism does assert the role of the people, or the little guy, versus the elite, or fat cats. So we generally understand it as the hard-working underdog majority are being exploited by the powerful. So Doug Ford, Donald Trump, they do speak to these issues of, look, Doug Ford, I'm for the little guy. But let's go down this. So okay. Doug Ford froze wages at $14 an hour. They were going to go up to $15 an hour next year. Now look, this doesn't just affect minimum wage workers. If you made anywhere near $14 an hour, your wage would have also likely increased. There is in fact a trickle-up effect when the minimum wage is increased. So freezing wages at $14 an hour, that's for the people. How about ripping up the Workers' Rights Bill, Bill 148, which included throwing away 2 paid sick days? We just lost benefits as workers in Ontario. Yet that's for the people. Reverting to the old sex ed program. I mean, who was that for? We were actually educating our kids on issues that have now come up in society, that need to be dealt with, that need to be explained properly to kids growing up. Yet, no, it's for the people to make sure our kids are less educated on gender equality, on trans rights. Yes, somehow that makes sense. How is that for the people? How about when Doug Ford illegally met with wealthy donors before the election? Now, this story was barely touched on, but I saw that, when I saw that story, I mean, that's all you need. And it bothered me that, look, I'm not a Kathleen Wynne person, but it bothered me that neither her or Andrea Horvath went after Doug Ford on that. That should have been the entire ad for them. Look, Doug Ford says he's for the people, but then why is he meeting with wealthy campaign donors at $2.50 a plate? I mean, this stuff writes itself. Ending funding for 3 new campuses in Markham, Milton, and Brampton. Somehow, again, cuts to education is for the people. Scrapping the basic income pilot. Look, whatever you think about basic income, I'm not even sure where I fall on that yet. But we have to try these new policy ideas because we are in a situation now where a lot of these jobs are being lost to automation. So somehow scrapping the basic income pilot is for the people. Look, Doug Ford is not a populist. He's a fake populist. If you want to know who is actually for the people, in Canada, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of examples of that, at least not individual politicians, as really our politics here is more based on party. But if you want the perfect example of a populist, look at Bernie Sanders in America. A guy that talks about wealth inequality. A guy that talks about a living wage. He discusses Medicare for all. Universal health care, something we already have here thanks to Tommy Douglas, an actual populist. Free college. Again, more education. This is beneficial for the people. Ending the wars. Again, beneficial for the people. Environmental policy that actually takes a look at climate change and how we could maybe slow it down a little bit. Again, these are policies for the people. A politician like Bernie Sanders is somebody that is an actual populist, actually for the people. And we need someone like that here. Now, is Jagmeet Singh that? Possibly. Maybe. I have liked some of what he's done, but I'm not completely convinced yet. But we now have Trudeau delaying a by-election in BC that Jagmeet Singh would need to win to actually be sitting in the House of Commons. So Trudeau is definitely not our populist savior. Elizabeth May speaks to a lot of issues that I'm with her on. I mean, I ran as a Green Party candidate, so I have, obviously, I do like her. But again, we need a populist leader in this country. We need our own Bernie Sanders because we know now, looking through policy by policy, that Doug Ford is not a populist. So you can follow me on Twitter at David Doel or visit me on YouTube at therationalnational.com. Thanks for listening to The David Doel Show on In-Depth Radio, News Talk 1010.
First off,